Tomorrow morning, the world wakes up to an unthinkable reality. Oil is gone. You step outside and head to your car, only to find the fuel gauge flashing empty. At the gas station, every pump has been taped shut, and long lines of drivers are already arguing with attendants who have nothing to give them. On the news, airports report that all flights have been canceled, cargo ships are stranded at sea, and supermarkets warn of immediate shortages. Inside factories, machines that never seem to stop are suddenly silent, while politicians rush into emergency meetings to face a crisis they never planned for. This is not a gradual decline or a distant prediction. It is a sudden disappearance. Oil has ended overnight. In this video, we will follow what happens next. We will trace the collapse from the first day to the first week, through the first months, and finally to the end of the first year. You will see how transport grinds to a halt, how food supply chains unravel, how economies spiral into freefall, and how nations scramble to replace oil with alternatives that are far from ready. As we go through this story, I want you to think about one question. If oil ended tomorrow, what would collapse first? Transport, food, or factories? Share your answer in the comments because I will tell you my view at the end. Day 1. The immediate shock. On the very first day, panic spreads faster than information. 90% of global transport relies on oil, and with no gasoline, diesel, or jet fuel available, mobility is paralyzed almost instantly. In a world that normally consumes around 100 million barrels of oil every single day, the absence is like oxygen suddenly being sucked out of the atmosphere. Gas stations across cities close within hours. Long lines of cars form, but pumps run dry before most people can refuel. By the evening, abandoned vehicles litter highways. Airports descend into chaos. On an average day, more than 100,000 flights take off around the world. Today, not a single plane leaves the ground. Passengers crowd into terminals, staring at departure boards filled only with the word "canceled." At seaports, cargo ships remain tied to their docks. Global shipping, which accounts for more than 80% of international trade, comes to a complete standstill. Fresh produce, electronics, medicine, and clothing, all the items that move unseen across oceans every day, are suddenly frozen in place. Supermarkets, which depend on daily deliveries, begin to panic. Trucks that left farms the previous night stop halfway, unable to finish their routes. Fresh fruits and vegetables rot inside trailers. Refrigerated containers sit idle with no power. Shoppers rush in to buy whatever is left, and by nightfall, the shelves are bare of rice, bread, and bottled water. Factories send workers home early. Without raw materials coming in, and with staff unable to commute, machines fall silent. The industrial hum that has become the background noise of modern life is gone. For the first time in human history, the world has gone an entire day without oil, and everyone can feel it. Week 1. Daily life. Falls apart. By the end of the first week, the cracks in daily life widen into a collapse. Plastics, which are made almost entirely from petroleum, vanish from production lines. The world normally produces around 400 million tons of plastic each year, and without oil, that number falls to zero overnight. Factories that made bottles, containers, and packaging stop immediately. Hospitals begin rationing supplies. Disposable gloves, syringes, IV bags, and ventilator parts all depend on petroleum-based plastics. Doctors sterilize and reuse tools meant to be thrown away. Safety drops, and infections rise. Public transport falters. Diesel buses stop running, and subways begin to break down without the spare parts that depend on petroleum in their manufacturing. With no alternative available, workers cannot reach their jobs. Cities freeze in place. Global trade shrinks to almost nothing. Air cargo is gone, container ships are immobile, and trucks sit idle. Countries that depended on imported food or medicine are suddenly cut off. Governments rush to reassure citizens. Leaders announce that electric vehicles will replace oil quickly, but the reality is sobering. Only about 1 in 7 cars worldwide is electric, and charging infrastructure is patchy, even in wealthy nations. Politicians also push solar and wind power, but these sources together provide less than 15% of global energy today, and scaling them requires manufacturing and shipping networks that no longer exist. The promises sound comforting, but the public sees through them. People begin to understand that oil was not just one option among many. It was the hidden foundation of everything. Week 2. Factories begin to shut down. As the second week passes, entire industries grind to a halt. Food factories are the first to collapse. Bread plants cannot operate without flour deliveries. Instant noodle factories shut because wheat and palm oil are stuck at farms. Soda plants have sugar, but no plastic bottles. Agriculture itself begins to fail. Fertilizers and pesticides are made from oil byproducts, and tractors and irrigation pumps rely on diesel. Without them, farmers are forced to return to manual labor, and yields immediately fall. Half of the world's crops today depend on synthetic nitrogen fertilizer, which is impossible to replace at scale without oil. Governments experiment with biofuels, diverting corn and sugarcane into ethanol and biodiesel. But this creates a vicious trade-off. Every acre of corn that goes into fuel is an acre that no longer produces food. Hunger spreads faster. Nuclear and hydro plants keep producing electricity, but building new ones takes years. They cannot expand fast enough to fill the gap. Factories close one after another, and millions of workers lose their jobs. The collapse of industry is no longer theoretical. It is visible in every city. Week 4. Energy grids starts to strain. By the end of the first month, the world begins to go dark. Oil itself provides only a small share of global electricity, about 3%, but it powers the transport systems that deliver coal and natural gas to power plants. With no trucks or ships operating, stockpiles run out. In oil-dependent nations, blackouts spread. Cities go dark, leaving streets silent and unsafe. Hospitals run on diesel backup generators, but that supply lasts only days. When the fuel runs out, life support machines fail. Governments attempt emergency programs. Some begin mass installations of solar panels and wind turbines, but the scale is far too small, and the supply chains for panels and turbines once relied on oil-powered shipping and mining. Without those, expansion slows to a crawl. A few countries endure. Norway, powered by hydro, and France, powered by nuclear, managed to keep their lights on. But the majority of the world sinks into darkness. The global night sky, once washed out by city lights, grows darker than at any point in modern history. For billions, it is the first time they have seen the Milky Way. Month 2 to 3. The food crisis begins. The second and third months bring hunger. Refrigeration chains break down. In normal times, around 20% of global food is lost to spoilage, but without transport that number doubles. Milk and meat rot in warehouses. Vegetables decay in shipping containers. Staple grains vanish. Rice, wheat, and corn, which together feed billions, no longer move across borders. Countries that relied on imports are left exposed. Governments promote urban farming. Rooftops, balconies, and parks are converted to small gardens, but the yields are tiny compared to the global demand. Meanwhile, the push for biofuels worsens the crisis. Corn and sugar that once fed people are now feeding vehicles. The trade-off is impossible to ignore, and hunger spreads faster. Global food insecurity, which already affected 800 million people before the crisis, doubles within weeks. Billions face shortages. Malnutrition rises in both poor and wealthy nations. Month 4 to 6. Full industrial collapse. By the middle of the year, industrial society has collapsed. The chemical industry, one of the largest consumers of oil, dies first. Fertilizers, pesticides, and plastics all disappear. Pharmaceutical factories cannot produce painkillers, antibiotics, or anesthetics. Hospitals ration the last supplies, and routine surgeries become dangerous. Plastics vanish from supply chains. Electronics factories cannot make casings. Packaging disappears from warehouses. Medical devices cannot be built. Construction halts. Asphalt, a byproduct of oil, no longer exists. Cement cannot be transported. Roads and housing projects are abandoned half-finished. Governments invest heavily in electric trucks to replace diesel fleets. But the mining of lithium, cobalt, and nickel, the essential ingredients for batteries, relied on oil-powered machines. With mining slowed to a crawl, the transition stalls. Solar and wind installations continue, but the pace is glacial. The global supply chains that once made renewable expansion possible are broken. By month 6, the hum of industry is gone worldwide. Year 1. Society comes under pressure. At the 1-year mark, the social fabric unravels. Migration spreads as families leave cities where food has disappeared and jobs no longer exist. Highways fill with bicycles, carts, and people walking with belongings strapped to their backs. Protests erupt everywhere. Governments fall. Wars begin over coal mines, gas fields, and fresh water. Alliances collapse as nations fight for survival. Black markets now dominate, and fuel is currency. A liter of gasoline trades for more than precious metals. Hunger is universal. Without fertilizers, global crop yields fall by half and billions face malnutrition. Millions die from starvation and preventable disease. Renewable energy grow but cannot fill the gap. Solar and wind expand in regions that still manage some local manufacturing. Nuclear plants run, but new ones take decades to build. The world has not ended, but it is smaller, hungrier, and more fragile. Beyond year 1, the world adapts and new systems emerge. Beyond the first year, humanity begins to adapt. Biopolymers made from plants and algae replace some plastics, though production is limited. Transport shifts toward electricity, especially in wealthy countries, but long-distance freight remains crippled. Ships and planes stay grounded, and bicycles and trains replace cars in many regions. Agriculture changes most. Organic and permaculture methods expand, but yields fall. Diets become local. Bananas vanish from Europe. Salmon disappears from Asia. Exotic foods that once crossed oceans are gone. Economies shrink but stabilize. Efficiency becomes survival. Waste is no longer tolerated. The age of oil ends, and a new era begins. It is not an era of collapse but of contraction, where humanity lives with less, slower, and closer to home. Now let us reflect. So what happens if oil ends tomorrow? By the first month, factories and energy grids fail. By the end of the year, famine, migration, and war reshape the world. Alternative energies help, but they cannot fill the gap quickly. Electric vehicles cannot replace 1.5 billion gasoline cars overnight. Solar and wind cannot replace 100 million barrels of daily oil consumption without the very supply chains that oil created. Nuclear power keeps running, but building new reactors takes decades. The end of oil is not the end of humanity, but it is the end of the world we know. Now I want to hear from you. If oil ended tomorrow, what collapses first in your eyes? Transport, food, or factories? Share your thoughts in the comments because I want to know how you see it. If this video made you think differently about how much oil shapes your life, check out the playlist on screen for more what-if scenarios. And make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next episode.